All right, so round 4 of Tuna School. This is the fourth topic in this series of tutorials that I'm crafting to try and be evergreen. I expect stats and things inside Eve Echoes to change over time, and a lot of content creators are doing a fantastic job of staying on top of that. My goal here is to provide you, dear listener, the strategic intent, the strategic opportunities and goals necessary to truly enjoy Eve Echoes, at least from my perspective, right? And different folks have different goals. Different folks have different things that they want to do. But I think if you follow this sort of play-by-play and, kind of do the homework and set your goals up for yourself and aim yourself towards learning primarily, you'll find that Eve Echoes is a much richer game than people give it credit for. Yeah, it's mobile. Yeah, you can play it on a phone, tablet, PC, whatever. But that doesn't make the people on the other end of the line, the folks on the other side of the screen, any less human or interesting because of that. And there's a lot of elements that go into that. And with that brief preface, let's get into it. So, one is the loneliest number that you'll ever do. When you start the game, unless someone invited you to the game, which I encourage you to invite your friends and see if they bounce off or see if they stick around, you'll probably end up playing alone. Nobody really wants to do the tutorial all in one sitting either. So you've got a long road ahead of you where you're going to be learning on your own. And assuming you don't skip the tutorial, because the free skill points and the free ships are kind of nice, but not really essential. You don't need it to play, and a lot of people who have alts don't do it. But assuming you do it, you get the basic controls and the basic how of scenarios, but you don't really get the why, the applications of those controls and scenarios. Like, yeah, it teaches you how to build a ship, but why would you want to, especially when the market prices for those ships are lower than what you spend to build them, more often than not. So it's through exploration of those sort of like limitations and boundaries that you discover that there's a rich and active world with a rich and active market, full of other people. And those other people have different motivations and things along the same lines, right? They had the same sort of experience coming in, excepting those who came from EVE Online. They probably have their own feedback transference or lessons learned that carry over into how they play this game. There's a lot more here than I think even they give the game credit for. So you've got a few options. You've got a few different approaches to how you learn the game and how you interact with the systems within it. The first, and I think the best, is to learn with the intention to teach. And this is because of something called the protege effect. Psychologically speaking, people are more inclined to learn what they have to recite or reproduce later. If they're learning something that they need to teach someone else, it sticks better. It sticks in their mind easier. It's easier to remember. There's also potentially learning with the intention to profit. I think that's something that everybody can agree is generally a good thing. But if your goal is to have a good time, maybe you want to go and explode things and get exploded, right? The trouble with that sort of approach is it's not sustainable. If you learn with the intention to profit, if you stay within your means and fly the ships that you can afford to fly, you'll find that the road to the top, that climb, stops becoming so much of a grind or a rush and starts becoming more of a long-standing journey. You live as a denizen within the universe, not as someone who is trying to speed run a dinky little phone game. And don't get me wrong, like, folks can have those goals. You can speedrun Eve Echoes pretty quickly, and rush through and beat the game and be on your way. But you're missing out on all the other folks and potential interactions and adventures that are, well, maybe not available to you depending on who you might be, but most likely available to you. There's also just going hard into solo. This is why I'm an idiot. There are a number of other reasons why I'm an idiot, and I mean that like in the strictest sense of the word. I am governed by my id in a lot of ways. But learning from the school of hard knocks is being adamantly and aggressively independent, right? I've got this bad habit. I will yeet ships and fleets and never claim SRP because I have made a basically a promise to myself that if I ever have to claim SRP on a ship, I have lost some bit of authority or ability to govern my own actions. I have to rely on the actions of my team, which, I mean, that's a major weakness of mine, right? My team is excellent. Team Tuna is the best of any corp I've encountered thus far, but I haven't experienced that many other corps, to be fair. This is just the folks who have stuck around, the folks who just keep swimming, who get that survival in this game is winning in its own right. And with that sort of like hard devotion to solitude, you miss out on a lot of other lessons. And this is something that I've recently been exposed to over the last 7 months or so. Um, and if you play with that sort of behavior, other people tend to be viewed as NPCs or just aspects of the game. It's only through conversations and actual interactions with folks that I've slowly kind of learned that there's a lot more than just playing on your own. There's a lot more than just going solo. And I'm going to take this incrementally. I'm going to go step by step. I'm not going to count all the way up to the size of the largest corporation. I think you guys can judge for yourselves how relationships complicate and accelerate and get well beyond the human capacity for understanding. But the simplest relationship, and there are two extremes when it comes to this, is two. You got to have two different dots to form a line, right? Two different points to make that connection, tessellate, and all that. The main way, and this shows up in media and in stories all the time, the primary trope behind the two-person team is the odd couple. This is your Sherlock Holmes and your Watson. This is your red demon, your blue demon. Trying to think of some other Yogi and Boo Boo, I guess, would come to mind. Basically, anytime you see two people, Abbott and Costello, if you want to go old school, two folks of vastly different experiences and styles, Wax and Wayne from Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series, Wax and Wayne, Brando Sando, awesome author. But two people with very different backgrounds or approaches to life. That's showing you something mythical, something mythic, monomythic. And it's a trope that's evolved into the greater canon of languages, plural, like human experience, because it's the most simple way to cover all conceivable problems that humans can encounter. You've got someone who's super aggressive, for example, compared to someone who's super defensive and patient. That aggressive person, that extrovert, is there ready and willing to say, hey, you forgot my introvert's fries, or something along those lines, right? They will cover the little guy's weaknesses by leaning into their strengths. And there's a tension that exists because of those two differences, but it's usually through some sort of either trauma bond or connection, external interest, that those odd couples come to be. And I've discovered a few within Eve Echoes just from the outside looking in, but I think there's a few others that I tend to plug myself into every now and then. The flip side of that disparity, that difference, those two very different people, are two people who are very similar, who fly extremely similar ships, who do kind of the same thing to an extreme. It's two of a kind. This is the very kernel, the root of what Doctrine actually is, considered in the Eve universe. And Doctrine is very different from how it is out here on Dirtside, the real world, in Eve. And I'll get into that a little bit later on one of the future lessons, Doctrine, Standards, and You. But it's an interesting thing to observe as people sort of moved through, or it was an interesting thing to observe as people moved through the levels and tiers and decided this ship is the best at this tier. And did their thing. People flying fleets of the same thing all over the place, doing the same thing everywhere they went. Because it really leans into the strengths of whatever ship or personality trait they have shared, that mutual possession. Two of a kind is like, it's more of a good thing, but it's also more of a bad thing. Whatever the weaknesses presented by that specific approach, for example, with battleships, their weakness is their speed. They're very slow. Capital ships have a similar thing, but that's mitigated through the use of cynosural beacons. Frigates are extremely fast, but they are squishy, super, super squishy. You can swat them like flies. Learning how to play with those constraints and find the boundaries of possibility. Small fleet roams, small fleet gangs, everybody in the same ship, like a slasher, are extremely fun. Doing the same thing as everybody else, you get that grouping, right? You've got a lot of overlap between abilities and the damage kind of ramps. But you're not going to have the right tool for every situation. You're going to have a specialized and effective tool which might work well in most situations, but there's always the potential that you'll come across someone who has a fit specifically designed for swatting flies. Rapid mediums with laser, what are they called? Targeting lasers, target painters, and a whole bunch of other options. When you lean into matching your peers, what you're doing is just creating more of the same. And I think I've beat that horse to death. So the two ends of the spectrum there are polar opposites, two people working together that are completely different, and they might not be as effective as a group of folks doing the same thing in a direction, right? But they're more universally effective. They fit into more potential problems, and maybe they'll not be as effective at solving them, but they'll have more of a chance of being effective at solving them, right? It's covering design space is basically the two differences. And anywhere in between on that spectrum of options, two disparate folks or two similar and same folks, you have a number of different converging options, right? There's complexity and emergence that occurs through complications in how people combine. Maybe you're an interceptor escorting a battleship through nullsec, so you scout ahead, you let them know the pipe is clear, and they move on through. Or maybe you're a destroyer flying support to an interceptor that managed to tackle someone, so you come in and give applied damage, since missiles tend to suck against things that are moving quickly, and that tackle should be making sure that your opponent ain't moving anywhere. You are fulfilling your role. You do more damage. This is part of the reason why I love the Tall War Sniper. It fits in with many, many different doctrinal goals. Basically, anytime a web is on the field, the Tall War is useful. Anytime I've ranted about the Tall War elsewhere, but let's stick to the slides for now. And that's kind of the basis upon which every other relationship is built, right? Because you have you and one other person. That's one relationship. And then you've got maybe person C, a relationship with them. You have two relationships going, but person B and person C have a relationship between themselves too. And you have a relationship to that perceived relationship. There's a story that exists there. Maybe you like how those two interact with each other. Maybe you don't like how those two interact with each other. You see how they either mesh or bounce off, and from that, adjust your behavior over time, right? You interact with folks differently based on how you perceive not only them, but how they treat others. And this is where things get interesting. This is where things get complicated. So, in order to better mesh with groups of folks, I'm going to give you kind of a little bit of a guide or goal on not only your personal approach to the game, but how you might approach the game with a team. Setting a budget for a corporation. We haven't gotten into corporations yet. We're still in the solo into meeting people phase as far as my experiences went. But one of the things that really helped me when it came to meeting other folks was setting a budget for in-game. I limited myself to small ships early on and made sure that any ship I lost, I could afford to lose. I could afford to replace without having to spend any ISK, right? With having a replacement ready on hand, pre-fitted, so I could go back to doing whatever I wanted to do. And there's a number of different ways to do this, a number of different ways to approach it. But I've learned. I recently took a project management course. There's a Coursera one out there for free that's pretty relatively painless, that talks about budgeting. But what's recommended by that course, or at least what was recommended, is to look for the best case scenario. So let's say I manage to farm nullsec completely and never get ganked once. I get to crab to my heart's delight. Nobody comes through and messes with me. That's the best case scenario. And calculating out, all right, if I do this many hours for the week, I can earn this much ISK, which will in the future afford me this many toys. Calculating that out, that's the best. That's the pie in the sky dream. The expected is closer to reality. I'm probably going to get ganked maybe twice a week, 3 times a week, and I might be snoozing for 2 of them, so I could potentially lose my ship once or twice. Having that expected value that includes losses worked into the equation makes it a lot easier to decide how many ships are necessary to achieve whatever your objective is. Then there's the worst case scenario. That's assuming that the absolute worst happens. Someone camps you and you have to go to plan B, whatever that mitigating goal is. So if you're in a battleship and they just leave a bubble outside and are ready to kill you anytime you make a move, maybe it's abandoning that post and going somewhere else where grass is a little greener. And the expected value is returned from there. And then the average of those 3 is probably closest to what you should set your goals based on. That's how you budget around uncertainty. And I've over the years, I've learned a lot from different folks. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I wouldn't play this game anymore if it wasn't for Benzie's continued output and motivation, like motivational, not necessarily talk or speech, but interaction with the medium. He has a tendency to speak truth to power. More often than not, it comes across as somewhat whiny, but it comes from a place of love. He talks about the need for small ship content in a lot of ways for many of the same reasons that I think small ship content is essential and existent in the game, but also could be leaned into and amplified and improved. And I usually talk about that in the Keep It Brief. If you stick around long enough, you'll see. So that's just one person that I eventually got to talk to. Rad. I enjoyed that. But I learned that about a year and a half ago, just from watching his talks about the patch notes and the questions and things like that. I also learned a lot from Rambo, Taylor Rick, and Damon Zell. The Echoes of New Eden podcast, they brought me on because I kept spamming on-air chat, honestly. And Rambo invited me, like brought me in saying, hey, do you want to talk? And me with my dinky little snowball and my microphone's probably whining. I need a new mic. I'm so sorry. I have no idea how to fix that. I'm doing my best. They brought me on out of the blue and they've accommodated my weirdness and given me a platform and a voice and feedback on the things and ideas that I have to say that I haven't had in years. And it's been extremely fun actually having those conversations. Damon Zell does a similar thing, especially with his presentation of the news, a niche that I adored about the original Eve. I like EO's scope and Talking in Stations was my podcast of choice back in the day. I don't know if it was a podcast. I'm pretty sure it is. I think I listened to it on YouTube. Anyway, it basically cruising through YouTube and seeing the different content creators and how they approach the game in different ways and the different niches they fill. Every content creator has a different view, right? They have their own kind of thing. And this is partly natural. This is because they want to cover as much of the potential audience out there as possible. But it's also kind of coordinated. Like, back when the game first started, I think there was some drama between Benzie and someone else. Might have been Gigaforte. I can't remember. About, I ship tutorials and things along those lines. And I think the game's evolved to a point where everybody gets it. What fit you use for one situation is certainly not the fit you would use for another. And the weird fits that we see getting killed, they might be leaning heavily into one specific strategy or another. I've definitely yeeted fits, sent ships that have random modules on there just because the cargo hold was full of other stuff, other goodies, other toys. It's something I do all the time with the Nereus line. And what I've learned from those teaming masses is that you should find your fun. And maybe you'll learn something else from them as your Echo's journey continues, but that's just what I took away. So let me bring it a little bit closer and talk about Tuna. Anybody outside of Tuna, this is going to apply to your own corporation with your own reflections and things that you've seen. But I've been with Tuna since, shoot, I was part of the Cosa Nostra. I was supposed to help set up like an assassination ring, but I bounced right off of that. There wasn't enough traffic, and I didn't know enough to hunt back then. So Tuna, I think it was Yeti who rolled me in. It was either Yeti or oh shoot. I can't remember who exactly rolled me into Tuna, but I'm extremely grateful that they did because I've been doing my own thing for ages, right? I play a very cowardly play style. I like to observe. I'm one who would rather watch than actively engage because of the risks associated with actively engaging. I'll fight when I want to. I just don't usually want to. I think the application of force with a desired effect is more important than just the application of force. Overwhelming force is its own kind of animal, and I'll talk more about that in the doctrines discussion. But for the purposes of this discussion, watching Tuna grow and the culture within the Discord evolve has been extremely interesting. I've got a bit of like tsundere energy when it comes to Tuna. I love those guys. Every one of them is an excellent pilot in my estimation. Shady is rad. Like, he was one of the few folks to actually participate when I was trying to set up Feto fights. I've got this thing for fighting rings. I really want to see a fighting ring within the Eve Echoes universe, and he was very supportive for that. Z killers I've seen become like a terrifying hunter. Same with Lord Mao. Mao's been around for ages too. Crazy has true leadership potential, like not even just potential, true leadership. He's got great decision-making skills, and I know he beats up on himself every now and then, but like he is excellent. I am a huge fan of every member of Tuna. Those are just like some of the characters that I've gotten to know, some of the people I've gotten to know over the years. And that's not even accounting the folks who've moved on to bigger and better things, right? Or well, depending on how you view it, but have moved on to other places. Yeti and his work elsewhere. Oh man, there was an interim CEO who was super self-conscious and nervous about his leadership style, and I think he ended up nervousing himself out of the position, but he did an excellent job in my estimation too. Like, it's really interesting to see how people interact not only with the other folks in the corporation, but also with their own actions and goals. And I think that's interesting. Unfortunately, because of my aggressive independence, it's kind of hampered my ability to get to know folks on anything but the most cursory of levels. I am generally glad-handing, and I will go through and point out the positives in folks far more quickly than I will point out the negatives, with a few exceptions. There are some folks who just rub me the wrong way. And even those folks, I will try and compliment as things go. But because of that, it makes me seem, I would say, disingenuous or annoying, Pollyanna, very, very much political, someone who goes around kissing hands and shaking babies. Not seemingly trustworthy, even though it's coming from a place of love more often than not. And I think I'm trustworthy, but what do I know? I'm just me. So I think if you find yourself in a corporation and you're on the fence, you should lean towards sticking around a little bit and then poking and talking to other corporations and local. Get a feel for the behaviors of other folks and see if what you're experiencing is natural or acceptable, helpful. if it's a place where not only do you see other people growing, but you could see yourself growing over time. I've definitely grown alongside tuna over the years. Whether that comes from accepting responsibility. I did not want to be CFO, but I knew that like if nobody else took it, it wasn't going to get done. So stepping up and trying to make the business move, make the business work. Especially since I'm so focused on reprocessing and scrapping metal and efficiency and trying to keep things moving and defending, avoiding risk. Those sort of things, like that's my shtick. And doing that for multiple folks was an extremely rewarding experience. And once the war's over, I can't wait to get back to it. But for now, I'm seeing the same sort of things within combat, which is extremely interesting. And then also shirking responsibility, knowing when to say, maybe you should do that, or maybe you should be the guy to tackle that. And this is something I'm extremely proud of Jarnik and Z Killers and the other folks within Tuna who help out with the Toughies, Tuna Fry, where if you follow these or if you're recruited by these tutorials, you'll probably end up in Tuna Fry. And it's a holding corporation that exists because spies are a thing. Mainly, we just want to know who the new bros are so we can dedicate our time and attention to them. And we've got two folks who are excellent at that job. I would be terrible at that job. I know I like to make these videos, but I think the main reason I like making these videos is because I'm not actually talking to a person. I'm laying out my thoughts in a way that hopefully other people see and understand and appreciate. And that's just me. But let's talk about you. So as a standard issue human, you have some fundamental limitations that I'd like to inform you of. And you might think I'm wrong, and I might be wrong. I very much might be wrong. There are exceptions more often than not. But some of the fundamental human limitations when it comes to relationships include Dunbar's number. And this was best illustrated in an article I read from Cracked Magazine way back in the day called The Monkey Sphere. If you've got good Google foo, you can find that. I think it might have been by David Wong, the guy behind John Dies at the End. Great book, good movie. But The Monkey Sphere is basically, you take a monkey and you present it like you've got a monkey here, and this monkey has a personality, a name, and like an identity. It's an identifiable individual, right? You take another monkey and now you've got two with two personalities and identities and personalities and all the things that go with monkeys. And you accelerate that, you take 3, take 4, take 5. How many monkeys does it take until you no longer see a group of individuals, but a group? How many bricks does it take before you've got a wall, right? How many individual trees does it take before you perceive a forest? And this is sort of the limitation when it comes to people too. You take your cashier at the local gas station, and that's a human being. They've got a name, personality, family, people that love them, dreams, goals, aspirations, everything that comes with, the territory. But you don't ask them any of that. They're not a part of your day-to-day life by, necessarily. You've got your own family, your own folks close to you, and your own friends, extended family, extended friend groups, friend circles. How far out does that go? Well, the truth is it doesn't go out nearly as far as people expect, usually because they're judging based off of Facebook friends if they're the older crowd, or TikTok or followers or social media, those indicators of how popular a person is. They're not true indicators of how well that person knows the folks that they are associated with. The limit to the number of relationships a person can have is generally around 150 to 200-ish. And these are just folks you know the general well-being of. You keep track of their, not necessarily day-to-day, but their lives at large, right? If they kick the bucket, you hear about it in a timely manner and can attend the funeral. Now, that's kind of how it works. Anything beyond that point is other, unless you actively train yourself to avoid that limitation. You got to see the humanity in humanity, right? And this is where a lot of isms come from. Any sort of othering language or any sort of delineator or dehumanizing concept. It's because Dunbar's number exists, and it's far easier to have a relationship with a stereotype or a story than it is to have with any specific group of individuals. There's just too many. There's too many of them. So that's the big limitation. That is probably the source of most of humanity's overarching issues and a lot of the wars and conflicts that occur. The nice thing about Eve Echoes is that's simulated in a lot of ways. We've seen fleets with more than that many people, right? And they coordinate just fine. Well, it's a lot of work. FCs put a lot of work and attention and require a lot of discipline to make that happen and experience. And that's fundamentally because of that limitation that they have. Another fundamental limitation that human beings have is short-term memory, and there are ways to get around this, mind palaces and other methods of maximizing the effectiveness of your short-term memory. But for most folks, it's around 7 to 10 numbers. It's the same reason why your phone number, generally, depending on where you're on the world, has between 7 and 10 numbers. Repetitive reinforcement, things are a lot easier to remember if you repeat them. Things are a lot easier to remember if you repeat them. Things are a lot easier to remember if you repeat them. The trouble is ritual repetition does not constitute meaning. What is repeated multiple times may be reinforced and may become perceived to be true the more it's repeated. But repetition is not observation. It is just reflection. If you say something over and over again, if you say the same lie over and over again, you might believe it eventually, but that's still a lie. And what the truth may destroy had it coming. As in all things, there's a law of diminishing returns. You've got one battleship on the field, and the field is full of enemy destroyers. That battleship is the king of the castle. You got 2 battleships, and you can delete that field. You got 3, 4, 5, 6, up to 10, 20. How many battleships you got? The same number of destroyers on the field. Well, someone's going to be popping them destroyers before the battleships can actually lock on and aim. There's a bit of a competition going on there. And the more of the same that you have, the more diminishing the returns are for that thing. And you see this a lot in blob fleets. You see this a lot in epic, over-the-top concentrations of force. Those concentrations of force exist to compete with other concentrations of force. But when it comes to actually achieving those objectives, they are inefficient because of certain bottlenecks that exist. Whether those bottlenecks are the number of players that can exist in a system, causing black screens in the old 50-50. Well, I went to the big fight, saw all those folks, didn't get to play. Everybody died. It was great. Moments. Or killing stations. I believe POSs, I know POSs at the very least, player-owned stations have a limit of 2,000 damage per second. And if you are above that 2,000 damage per second, well, you're wasting damage. If you're below that 2,000 damage per second, well, you're not being efficient. You're not doing enough damage. So the ideal scenario for a truly coordinated and efficient team is to hit that 2,000 mark every second on the second, which is doable, especially if you've got practice, especially if you've coordinated with your team before. I believe that's how, was it Dex and Hetch or something? Rambo mentioned it in last night's, mentioned those two in last night's Echoes of New Eden podcast, which you should go give it a listen if you haven't yet. It was a really good conversation. But he mentioned those two as like a dynamic duo who have mastered the art of killing bosses. And maybe this isn't something they do, but it's something that, should be worth consideration. You get diminishing returns the more of the same thing you apply in most situations. Sometimes more is more, right? But usually numbers ain't everything. Finally, I'm going to talk about Pareto distributions. This gets way down into the weeds, and I tried to ease our way into relationships, but there are a certain number of folks who are very good at making relationships and having those relationships and maintaining them. And as a result, everybody knows their names. These popular folks become more popular as more folks hear their names, and they grow and grow and grow their viewer bases. Anytime there is a competition, anytime there is some sort of selection, rock, paper, scissors, or flipping a coin, you're going to have eventually, well, hold on, not flipping a coin, scratch that. Anytime where someone wins and someone loses, eventually the winners win all and everybody else loses. It slowly skews towards what survives and that or what gains, right? Wealth attracts wealth. Kindness attracts kindness. If you're, well, not always, but it's that sort of expectation. But as those Pareto distributions exist within those specific arenas of conflict and competition, the folks who lose out have a different sort of resource dependent on that competition. So folks who lose a game early, for example, are going to be a lot either more sour or a lot more resigned and bored watching everybody else play the game. Anybody who's played Monopoly has experienced this. Anybody who's played the Monopoly and has played Monopoly and hasn't flipped the board, I mean, because Monopoly is a terrible game, honestly. And that's those 5 points really define what the people do and how relationships potentially can work for you and your corporation and eventually your alliance. Hopefully that corporation is tuna if you manage to get through tough, but if not, that's cool too. I want you to find your fun. I want you to go to the places that reward you for being you and help you grow into the you that you want to be. Whether that's in game or out of game, just shooting the breeze or shooting the bad guys. All right, so your homework for this episode is to make friends by joining the war. I want you to look at all the information that you can gather about the war and pick the losing side. Join what you think is going to be the losing side over the long term, because loss equals learning. Now, none of the factions have been very shy about their expectations and goals at this point in time. But if you pay close attention and make some predictions, I think the way the war is going to go is going to surprise you. I hope it surprises me at the very least. That's for new players, if you are new to the game. If you're experienced in the game, I want you to do a different bit of homework. I want you to compliment your enemy. And this is for 2 reasons. Mainly, this is because you don't want to play chess with a pigeon. And what do I mean by that? That's arguing with an idiot is like playing chess with a pigeon. They're just going to bring you down to their level. They're going to knock over the pieces, and they're gonna soil themselves all over the board. They'll defecate all over the board. I'm trying to tone down the language because I know not everybody who plays this game is old enough for those sensitive words. But don't bring yourself down to the level of the people that you're criticizing. I think the hallmark of a leader is being unflappable, understanding and comprehending the situation as it stands and tactfully addressing it. One of the ways to tactfully address situations is to praise people in public, and this is important because the more you praise folks, one, it heartens them, especially for things that you want to see. If you want to see them do more of that thing, hey, let them know. But 2, it gets other people motivated to do similar things, right? You're calling out, hey, that's good, do more of that. So praising people in public is something that you should do. Compliment your enemy. Recognize the good in them. And then also criticize someone in private. Find some flaw or issue that person has, potentially, that you perceive, and talk to them about it. This is a very delicate thing to do, and I was taught that the best approach is to create like a sandwich of compliment. You did this great. This was not so great, but you also made up for it by doing this, right? You give the good, the bad, and then the good is what's expected. But that's not necessarily always effective. Some folks just want you to shoot straight, tell it like it is. Hey, you messed up here. Don't do that again. Got it, boss. That's all I need to know. Understand your audience and try and communicate in a way that suits them so that the message comes across clearly. This is in the spirit of the holidays, by the way. And if you find yourself getting in trouble, go back to the compliments. Complimenting will never, well, it will get you in trouble eventually, especially if you compliment and don't mean it sincerely. Be honest in your appraisals. Anything like I said before, what truth may destroy had coming. Criticism is very different than critique, by the way. Critique is something that can and should be done in public. It's highlighting an issue. And I've got a video in the works that critiques the 2 Reddits situation. So keep an eye out for that moving forward. Future episodes. Here's what we got coming up. Next week, I get to take a vacation and basically just write fiction again, which is going to be nice. I'm going to outline the NPCs in my little pocket of Eve Echoes, and if I were to be making the game, this is the sort of story I would make within the game. So the Seventh Circle Bar and Pleasure House. After that, battle rhythm and good fight mentality, basically making sure that you're engaging with the game in a way that's healthy and not addictive. Also, Standards, Doctrine, and You. That's kind of the follow up to this conversation about relationships and battle buddies and having friends and found family. Exploration, that was requested by one of the listeners. And then Rifter training. Originally that was going to be an Ask Me Anything, but I'm not very interesting, so you guys don't have very much to ask. Yeah. But I'm going to talk about the cool things that you can do in a Rifter, even though it is arguably the worst ship in the game. Corporate economics, I'm going to talk about how Tuna makes money, or at least hopefully continues to make money. We'll see how the war goes. Ship shopping, ISK per effort, and ISK per stat. I think that's something that not a lot of folks appreciate. And so they overpay for a lot of the stats that they apply on the field. And that's what we got on the docket. Last but not least, extra credits. Last week, I believe I mentioned Folding Ideas, Why It's Rude to Suck at Warcraft, that documentary. But that's not the only thing that they've got. Folding Ideas is relatively humorous, snarky, and interesting. He goes in depth and actually, he makes really good videos. And as a fan of Bakshi just in general through history, I think that's how that's not how I found him, but I don't know. Give him a look. See if you like him. It's one of those channels that I enjoy. I think that's it. Yeah. As always, we're doing the Dungeon Blackjack thing, but I haven't had any takers so far. Offer still stands. I hope you all have a good day, and if you're watching this around the time it comes out, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, enjoy Festivus for the rest of us, and have a good evening.